I feel the need for speed. Top Gun wasn't just a slick action movie, it was a cultural detonation that redefined the image of American masculinity, rewrote the rules of Hollywood blockbusters, and even changed real-world military recruitment. Behind the polished dogfights and sweaty locker room bravado, chaos brewed on set. Camera rigs caught fire midair, actors clashed with Navy officials, and Tom Cruise nearly got ejected from the film, literally. Today, we're peeling back the afterburners to uncover 20 weird facts about Top Gun, the secrets that never made it past the cutting room floor, and wait until you hear the bonus fact, a hidden truth so strange it ties Top Gun to an entirely different era of American propaganda. Buckle up, Maverick. Engage those thrusters, hit that like button, and let's dive in. The script was based on a magazine article. Top Gun didn't begin as a bold Hollywood original. It was born from a 1983 California magazine article titled Top Guns, written by journalist Ehud Yonai. The piece chronicled the real-life U.S. Navy fighter weapons school in Miramar, San Diego. Producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer bought the rights almost immediately. What audiences didn't know was how literally the film lifted real incidents, dogfights described in the article, made their way into Maverick's cinematic maneuvers. Without that article, there would be no Goose, no Iceman, no Highway to the Danger Zone. What seemed like pure Hollywood invention was in fact ripped straight from naval life, just with a Tom Cruise grin layered on top. The Pentagon had script approval. The U.S. Navy wasn't just a silent consultant. They demanded script approval before allowing paramount access to aircraft carriers, F-14s, and real pilots. Several early drafts portrayed reckless Navy behavior, and the Pentagon vetoed them outright. Even Goose's death had to be rewritten to ensure it didn't reflect pilot incompetence. The deal was simple. The Navy gave Paramount access to $1 billion worth of military hardware, but in return, the script had to paint the service in a heroic light. Not propaganda? Think again. By opening weekend, Navy recruiters set up booths outside theaters, and Top Gun effectively became the most successful recruitment ad in U.S. history. Tom Cruise initially refused the role. Tom Cruise wasn't sold on Top Gun. He thought the story sounded silly, a vanity project about cocky pilots. It took producer Jerry Bruckheimer staging a real flight in a Blue Angels jet to change his mind. Cruise was tossed around by G-forces, vomited upon landing, but walked away electrified. He immediately called Bruckheimer. "I'm in." Not just in, he became obsessed. Cruise insisted on performing his own flight sequences, often pressuring Navy pilots to push maneuvers past what the studio insurance allowed. The role didn't just launch him into superstardom, it ignited a lifelong obsession with doing his own death-defying stunts. Val Kilmer didn't want to play Iceman. Val Kilmer only took the role of Iceman under contractual obligation. Fresh off Shakespearean stage work, he thought the part was shallow. But once on set, Kilmer leaned into the rivalry, clashing with Cruise both on and off camera. Their tension wasn't scripted, it was real. Kilmer's aloofness and Cruise's relentless energy created an electricity the filmmakers couldn't have manufactured. In interviews, Kilmer admitted he improvised much of his cold stare and dismissive body language toward Cruise. Audiences thought they were watching movie magic. In reality, they were watching two actors locked in an ego dogfight. The inverted bird scene was real. One of the most outrageous moments in Top Gun, Maverick flipping his F-14 upside down to flip off a MiG, actually happened. It was inspired by a true story from Navy pilot Jim Lang, who described maneuvering within feet of a Soviet aircraft during training. Filmmakers pushed to replicate it with real jets, and though staged more safely than in real life, the scene required precision flying at terrifyingly close quarters. Cinematographer Tony Scott famously fought the Navy to capture the shot, insisting, "It's not just a stunt, it's Maverick's soul." What looked like pure Hollywood exaggeration was shockingly grounded in fact. Tony Scott bribed a carrier captain. Director Tony Scott was obsessed with capturing the perfect sunset carrier shot. One afternoon, while filming on the USS Enterprise, he asked the captain to turn the ship around so the sun would hit the flight deck just right. The captain refused, citing fuel costs. Scott pulled out his checkbook and wrote a $25,000 personal check on the spot. The captain laughed and turned the carrier. The resulting golden hour footage became some of the most iconic in the film. Not many directors literally buy their own sunsets, but Scott wasn't making just another action flick. He was painting operatic military poetry with billion-dollar toys. Goose's death was a real tragedy in disguise. Audiences gasped when Goose's head slammed the canopy and he drowned in the ocean. But the scene wasn't just dramatic, it was eerily inspired by real pilot fatalities. The Navy insisted the accident be mechanical, not pilot error, so the writers crafted an ejection sequence gone wrong. During filming, actor Anthony Edwards admitted he was shaken by the authenticity, saying he felt like he was watching an obituary in motion. Edwards would later say Goose's death changed his career. It cemented him as more than comic relief. What viewers didn't realize was that Goose embodied the Navy's greatest fear, the randomness of death even in the best-trained cockpits. The volleyball scene was almost cut. The infamous beach volleyball game, drenched in sweat and slow-motion machismo, wasn't in the original script. Paramount execs demanded more sexy. Energy director Tony Scott shot it like a fashion commercial, complete with oiled-up actors and pounding Kenny Loggins on the soundtrack. The studio hated it at first, calling it pointless. Scott fought to keep it, arguing it captured the movie's mix of competition and desire. In retrospect, it became one of the most parodied and analyzed scenes in film history. What wasn't meant to be central became a defining cultural artifact, a sun-soaked metaphor for male rivalry and attraction. Meg Ryan and Tim Robbins were virtual unknowns. When Meg Ryan appeared as Goose's bubbly wife, audiences had no idea she'd become America's sweetheart just a few years later in When Harry Met Sally. The same with Tim Robbins, who played Merlin in the cockpit. Robbins barely had screen time, but within a decade he'd headlined The Shawshank Redemption. Casting them wasn't luck, it was Paramount's strategy of padding small roles with fresh talent. At the time, Ryan and Robbins were considered cheap unknowns. In hindsight, Top Gun accidentally launched two Hollywood legends. What seemed like background casting turned into a snapshot of future stardom waiting to explode. The real pilots got paid peanuts? Here's the kicker. The Navy pilots who pulled off the real aerial maneuvers, risking their lives for Paramount, were paid just $7,800 each. That's right. The studio spent millions on music rights but gave pilots little more than hazard pay. One pilot later joked, "We weren't actors, we were stunt doubles with wings." Yet their work made the movie unforgettable. Every barrel roll, every screaming dive, every cloud-slicing shot was real. CGI didn't exist yet. Without those underpaid pilots, Top Gun wouldn't have soared. And before we move on, go ahead and like and subscribe because the next 10 facts are about to take you deeper into the cockpit chaos and studio battles you've never heard about. Kelly McGillis was much taller than Tom Cruise. Kelly McGillis, cast as Charlie, stood at 5 feet 10 inches, while Tom Cruise was around 5 feet 7 inches. This difference caused headaches for cinematographer Jeffrey Kimball. In intimate scenes, Cruise was often filmed on apple boxes, or McGillis was asked to go barefoot. In the elevator love scene, Cruise wore cowboy boots to even the frame. Despite the trickery, their chemistry worked on screen. Off camera, McGillis admitted she didn't always feel the connection, saying Cruise was laser-focused on his career, not romance. Yet the Navy demanded Maverick have a civilian love interest, so their storyline was non-negotiable. Audiences never suspected how carefully the production staged each kiss and glance. Not passion, but production math kept Maverick and Charlie eye to eye. The Navy charged Paramount millions for fuel. The Navy wasn't giving its toys away for free. Paramount paid $11,000 per flight hour for the use of F-14 Tomcats. Across production, that translated to millions of dollars in fuel and maintenance. Producer Don Simpson once joked they were burning dailies at Mach 2. The cost was so high the studio debated using miniatures instead. But director Tony Scott refused, insisting audiences could see the truth in the sky. The gamble paid off. Real footage gave Top Gun its raw power. Ironically, the Navy made money on the movie, while also reaping a massive recruitment surge, not expense, but investment. Paramount turned Pentagon hardware into box office gold, while the military sold Maverick's swagger to a new generation of recruits. Cruise pushed for a real flight experience. Tom Cruise didn't want to just act like a pilot. He demanded real flight training. The Navy agreed, but warned him. The G-forces would break him. During his first ride, Cruise blacked out. Yet he came back the next day demanding another go. Soon he was logging hours in real jets, learning how to handle barrel rolls, dives, and inverted climbs. Director Tony Scott didn't even need to tell him how to look in awe. The expressions were genuine. Cruise admitted, "I didn't have to act. I just had to survive not performance, but endurance." What audiences saw wasn't movie magic. It was Cruise clinging to consciousness while becoming Maverick for real. The soundtrack almost didn't include Danger Zone. Highway to the Danger Zone is iconic, but Kenny Loggins wasn't the first choice. The song was originally offered to Toto and then REO Speedwagon, who both turned it down. Even Bryan Adams refused, saying the film glorified war. Desperate, producers turned to Loggins, who recorded it in just a few days. Ironically, the track became his biggest hit and forever fused his name with the film. Tony Scott initially wanted a darker, more atmospheric theme, but Simpson and Bruckheimer demanded a fast, radio-ready anthem. The result? One of the most recognizable soundtracks in cinema. Not just music, but marketing. Danger Zone didn't just sell records, it sold Top Gun as an adrenaline-fueled fantasy that audiences couldn't resist. A camera rig almost killed a pilot. Filming dogfights was terrifying. Cinematographer Tony Scott mounted heavy cameras onto the cockpits of F-14s. On one flight, a rig loosened mid-maneuver, slamming against the glass canopy. The pilot almost ejected, believing the aircraft was compromised. Luckily, he managed to stabilize and land safely. The footage from that day, some of the most dramatic in the movie, Scott admitted later, "We risked lives for frames, not exaggeration, but truth." Every second of airborne footage carried real danger, with millions of dollars and human lives balanced on shaky mounts. Hollywood called it artistry. Pilots called it barely controlled chaos. What audiences didn't see was just how close the movie came to disaster in the skies above Miramar. 16. Tony Scott was nearly fired mid-shoot. Tony Scott's visual style, smoky rooms, silhouettes, endless sunsets, wasn't what Paramount expected. Executives complained dailies looked like perfume ads, not a military blockbuster. At one point, they considered replacing him, but producers Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson fought for him, arguing the MTV look was the film's secret weapon. Scott doubled down, pushing harder with lens flares, golden hour flights, and blue-filtered cockpits. In the end, what seemed like self-indulgence became Top Gun's defining aesthetic. Critics called it style over substance, but audiences were hypnotized, not realism, but spectacle. Scott's survival as director transformed a risky project into a cultural firestorm that still defines his career. The MiGs were actually American jets, those sleek enemy MiGs, not Soviet at all. They were U.S. Navy F-5, Tiger II jets, repainted black to look menacing. The Cold War backdrop made authenticity impossible. No one was loaning Paramount actual Soviet planes. The F-5s belonged to the Navy's aggressor squadron, trained specifically to mimic enemy tactics. By painting them matte black and filming from creative angles, Scott made them look foreign and dangerous. Viewers thought they were seeing classified Soviet hardware. In reality, it was American steel in costume, not enemy but ally disguised. The deception worked so well that even aviation buffs admitted the illusion was flawless. Top Gun blurred truth and theater in the skies, just as it did on the ground. The love scene was a studio add-on. The elevator kiss and silhouetted bedroom scene, they weren't in the original shoot. After test audiences complained there wasn't enough romance, Paramount called Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis back months later for reshoots. By then, Cruise had cut his hair short for another role, so he wore a wig in the elevator sequence. McGillis had changed her look too, forcing the crew to dim the lighting to hide inconsistencies. What audiences believed was a natural extension of Maverick and Charlie's story was pure patchwork. Not chemistry, but compromise. The studio's late edition gave the movie its sensual pulse, though even critics admitted it felt spliced in. Hollywood romance wasn't written, it was manufactured under fluorescent lights. The final scene was written overnight. Originally, Top Gun ended with Maverick scattering Goose's dog tags into the ocean and walking away from flying forever, but test screenings hated it. So Simpson and Bruckheimer demanded a new ending, Maverick returning as a flight instructor and reuniting with Charlie. Tony Scott wrote the scene literally overnight on the back of a napkin. The rushed fix changed the film's legacy from tragedy to triumph. It also turned Maverick into a mentor, setting up decades later possibilities for Top Gun Maverick. What felt inevitable on screen was, in truth, a desperate studio gamble, not destiny but rewrite. And yet it gave the movie its iconic closing note: love, redemption, and jets roaring toward the horizon. Critics initially hated the film. Here's the twist: when Top Gun premiered, critics weren't impressed. The New York Times dismissed it as a 2-hour Navy recruitment ad. Roger Ebert gave it just 2.5 stars, calling it style over story, yet audiences didn't care. The film grossed over $350 million worldwide and became the year's highest-grossing movie. The Navy reported a 500% increase in recruitment inquiries, especially for aviation programs. Critics saw hollow spectacle, but audiences saw aspiration, adrenaline, and romance, not flop, but phenomenon. Top Gun proved critics could pan a movie that still reshaped culture. In hindsight, their dismissal only underscores how far the film outpaced traditional expectations of cinema. The movie changed U.S. foreign policy. The strangest legacy: Top Gun was quietly screened for international military delegations. Pentagon officials used it as a soft power tool, projecting American air dominance during the Cold War. Some historians argue it directly influenced negotiations with allies like Japan and NATO countries, boosting U.S. defense contracts. In effect, Top Gun wasn't just a film, it was a weaponized myth. Not art, but arsenal. Few Hollywood blockbusters can claim to have bent geopolitics, but Top Gun sits in that rare echelon. From magazine article to box office titan to global influence machine, it blurred the line between cinema and strategy. Top Gun was never just about fast jets and aviator sunglasses. It was a fever dream of 1980s America. Reckless, stylish, and strangely powerful. It turned Tom Cruise into a superstar, redefined blockbuster filmmaking, and even rewrote real-world history. That's the secret fuel behind Maverick's legacy. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, hit like, smash subscribe, and tell us in the comments which Top Gun fact blew your mind the most. Talk to me, Goose.